Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cabinet meeting this evening. And welcome to everybody in the audience as well this evening. You are most welcome. Okay, I'm going to go through the housekeeping, if that's okay. Fire action procedures this evening. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building. The fire exit's located at the side of the room, the doors you came in. Please leave through those doors, exit through the reception you came in, and please meet in the War Memorial Park. So if the fire alarm does go off, please don't leave. Go and stand with us in the War Memorial Park to make sure that we know everybody has left the building safely with the fire marshals. The meeting's going to be webcast. It's going to be webcast live on the internet. It's also available on YouTube afterwards if you want to look for the Basingstoke.gov YouTube channel. In terms of microphones, can I remind everybody that in order to be heard clearly, we move the microphones towards us, and that's the same for the speakers coming this evening to speak at the table. And in terms of mobile telephones, could I ask you, please, could you all turn them on to silent or turn them off? That would be most helpful. Thank you for that. Okay, apologies for absence this evening. There are none. Declarations of interest this evening. Do we have any? There are none. I have no urgent matters on the agenda, but I have the minutes then of the meeting held on the 6th of February. Do I have your permission to sign those minutes as a true and accurate record of that meeting? Yes. Agreed? I will do so. Yeah, I can remember just. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the notice of motion referred from council, the ice rink motion. I've got two speakers on that this evening, Councillor Lee and Councillor McCormick. Would you both like to come up to the speaker slot? And Alex, you go first, followed by Andy, and then we can have a conversation. You've both got 4 minutes, but I'm going to let you have your good judgment, as it were. I'm not being silly about that this evening. You say your piece, but see how we go.
I'm going to read a bedtime story for you, Paul. Is that? Thank you. Before we start, I do want to address some comments that I have seen on an article in the Gazette Online. Despite what people are suggesting in those comments, I have been campaigning to help save the rink for several years now. In fact, it's one of the reasons that I got into politics in 2016 after the debacle of the New River retail proposals and the threat to sports then, to ice sports then. To suggest otherwise, without knowing the facts, is an outright lie. Onto the issue itself. For many years, regardless of political persuasion, the ice rink has appeared to be the ugly duckling of sport across the borough, and this needs to stop today. I'm not going to apologise for calling people out on this issue. We are here as councillors to make this borough the very best for our residents, and this includes all of those that are here tonight. Councillor Harvey, you mentioned at the full council meeting that football wants help and support, that rugby wants help and support, and that hockey wants help and support. And you are correct. But I will say that rugby has had help and support over the years. That football, as a sport in the borough, has had help and support over the years. And as I read in the Basingstoke Dean today, that many of the residents across the borough get, a hockey pitch is again being provided for those who play field hockey. And this is despite only having one less than 10 years ago built for them. Now, I'm asking as a cabinet, how many or how much has any administration provided for ice sports over the same period? The answer is quite simply nothing. So why do we continue to neglect a sport that in Basingstoke is played by or participated in by more people than some of those sports that get a lot more help and support from this council? Whilst I appreciate that Cabinet requires a debate between Cabinet members on this issue, I do hope that you can engage with myself and others during that debate so that we can get to a proper resolution for all those ice users that so desperately want an end to this merry-go-round. Because once again, Planet Ice are suggesting to those users that it is this council who are holding up any repairs. And I think that they would appreciate someone putting on the record tonight that that simply isn't the case. Onto the motion, and I'll try and address each point in turn. So with regards to the independent investigation, We discussed it at full council, and I'm fully prepared to accept that that goes via scrutiny to understand where the issues lie, how we have managed to get to where we are today, and what we can do to prevent this from happening in the future. I get the points that were made at full council, that it can be a waste of time. We are where we are, and that it's not going to change where we are. The point being is that we need to prevent this from happening again to another facility. The potential that this could happen to the ice rink again in the future if it gets resolved. We need to stop that from happening. So I'm prepared to accept that that goes to scrutiny, and I hope that can be done within like the soonest possible opportunity to do that. That goes without saying then that the reporting the results to the community's Environment and Partnerships Committee, I'll be able to attend the scrutiny committee and feedback through there. I don't necessarily believe that it needs to go through CEP if it's going to scrutiny as the first point of call, because they will be able to carry out the same sort of functions as what we are within CEP. However, I do insist that those results get communicated where possible to the members of the public. They need to be told what's going on and how we've got to where we are, so that they can come back and talk about it as well. The next one then is to arrange a meeting within 2 months of the passing of the motion with the Ice Users Forum and coaches, both of ice hockey and figure skating. I think this is important. We have got, in previous times, I believe that a solution was overscoped in order to keep the Bison playing. The main thing is that we need to support those children that are going through these sports now. If we lose those GB level coaches, it's going to take a decade at least to try and build that back up to a level where, only this year we've had countless number of medals from figure skating, and I could count off the top of my head at least 5 GB call-ups before March for the ice hockey. So this is a well-loved sport, and people are progressing to national level from Basingstoke, and we need to continue that. The only way we do that and ensure that that happens is by having a temporary facility, because regardless of whether Planet Ice do the work or whether we take on anything in the future, you're going to have to close the ice rink. And then what? Then what happens to those children, those coaches? And then with regarding to the legal advice, Councillor James, again, I appreciate in full council you said that we are working as hard as we can with through legal, that it's been sort of run through the mill essentially. But if you to go down there, you will see a number of issues that, in my mind, need to be acted on. There are holes in the plexiglass or between the plexiglass that allow pucks to be shot through, which, in my mind, is dangerous. I may not be able to hit it at speed, but some of these kids can slap shot a puck and it will hurt. It will seriously hurt somebody. The floor is uneven. I have seen children fall on that ice, and I hope they don't mind me saying it. There was one in this room tonight that tripped on the uneven floor and was unable to play hockey for a period because he injured his knee off of the ice. It's not acceptable anymore, and we need to put an end to that. So however we do it through those legal contracts, we need to get them to make improvements there, and very quickly. That's all I'm going to say tonight, and I hope we can have a good debate on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciated. Andy, you got the microphone.
Oh, thank you, Leader. Hopefully I won't need anywhere near 4 minutes. It's a shame, actually, that Councillor Dillo isn't here tonight to speak, because I noticed in the Gazette he's on the record as saying that the ice rink is an embarrassment to Basingstoke, so I'd be keen to hear him expand his views. As somebody who's born in Basingstoke, spent most of my life in Basingstoke, and can remember when the ice rink was built, it's dismaying to see the state that it's allowed to be gotten into. My understanding is that we're still the freeholder for the ice rink. It's pretty obvious to everyone the state the rink is in. If things continue as they are, the building is at eventual risk of being unsafe or condemned. You've heard evidence tonight that it might be unsafe already. We're having people injuring themselves on the floor in the building. That's not acceptable. So, as the landowner, at what point do the council step in, or what point does the council have obligations under health and safety to step in? And my other concerns, which are by no means secondary to that, is if we were to say, right, tomorrow we're going to have a new rink and we'll have to build a temporary rink, how long will people have to wait for this new rink? And what is stopping the council from building a temporary rink? Because the ice users here have been waiting for a decent facility for years. And the feeling that a lot of people get is that we're no closer now than we were 5 or 10 years ago to getting a new ice rink. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Yes, well, thank you for those comments. And we do recognise how passionate people are about the ice rink and how important it is to people. It's not lost on us. We started this journey as an administration wanting to keep ice in Basingstoke. We have not wavered from that view. Long term, we want ice to be in Basingstoke and have a long-term positive future. I have been to the ice rink, and I can't pretend to be as dedicated user as Alex, but I went there for discos back in the late 80s, and I think the ice rink's deteriorated even more than I have since that time. It was awful, and the floor is just so uneven. It was a sad sight to see, and we recognise that. Obviously, in terms of the health and safety, we are carrying out with the Planet Ice have to carry out regular checks on the safety of the premises and report back to us. We see those things and we consider those things and make sure that any emergency work is completed. So that's being gone. So if I start with the legal process, as you completely understand, it is a process and there are various steps on the process. It is a legal process. Therefore, there will be lawyers from all sides watching what I say, which is why I'm going to say very little. What I can assure you is we are aware of the contents of the lease and our responsibilities, and we are carrying them out in the most appropriate manner according to those agreements and the law that sits above those things. And I can't go any further than that in public realm. In terms of council holding up repairs, I can absolutely say we are not responsible for the building, apart from making sure in our sort of role as a local council that it's safe, and we're not responsible for an ice rink. So we are not holding up any repairs. The disagreement seems to be between the private owner of the premises and the fact that Planet Ice will have to spend significant millions and will want a stronger lease in terms of to pay back, for the repairs to pay for themselves. They need a longer lease. So that's the negotiations that we get on between those two parties. All we can do is enforce, is it a safe premises to operate as a leisure facility? There is no standard securities don't have to have it as an ice rink. They have to keep it as a safe leisure facility, and we're acutely aware of that as well. So that's the current situation. More than happy to meet the ice users. We have been looking into, and not for the first time as an authority, a lot of work was done in 2019 on this. You can check on the Gazette website around the temporary ice rink. At the moment, the cost of it would be in excess of £2 million a year to provide a temporary ice rink. And I think you mentioned in council about overscoping that, and maybe we need to be more realistic about what can be delivered. More than happy to investigate that as much as we can, take it to CEP, look at the options. Obviously, the clear option is the council's contribution is likely to be in the provision of land rent-free rather than in terms of funding it. It would have to be funded by the number of people using the rink. So we've got to work out, you can shrink the provision, but then if you shrink the number of users that can access it, then you're not going to get the revenue to pay for it, and it will need to pay for itself. We can't expect taxpayers to sort of step in and subsidise it more than us donating the land to it for a short period of time. And I need to get an understanding of the definition of temporary ice rink, because I see these things pop up at Christmas, sit there for 3 months, and then get taken away again. I'm really concerned that we couldn't have it there for 4 or 5 years, because then you're going to get a permafrost problem somewhere else. So I need to understand exactly how it works in terms of what we do. And apparently fake ice, which is a thing, isn't a thing if you're a semi-dedicated ice skater. But again, I'll take the ice users' advice on these things. So happy to get them in, have a conversation. We'll need to do that before we go into PERDA period, so that when we report back to CEP or whatever committee it is in June, they'll have all the information available to them about what we could do and the costs and the consequences. As I say, it will be a case of we've got to look at making sure there's enough people who can use it to pay their £18.50, whatever it happens to be, to use it for a couple of hours so it pays for itself. Our biggest contribution to ice sport, because you mentioned about, is it a sport that's neglected, it's peppercorn rent for that piece of land. And it may be our contribution is a bit more land. And that's really, I think, all I can cover. So we're exactly where you are in terms of our commitment. We wish, Paul and I wish, that we could have walked into administration, pulled a magic lever, and it all fixed itself, and we knew where we were. But it's not that simple. At the moment, our hope is that the current ice rink, which is a great facility, was a great facility, can be a great facility again, does get repaired. Because actually, in terms of cost to the taxpayer and everything else, we'd have a much better facility if that was repaired. And we'd have to look at what provision we apply in the interim, but that's more CEP to advise us on that when you got the information. So that's still our goal, and so we've got the backstop of actually if it can't be repaired, what else do we do about it? Which is why it was an option. Appreciate there's a letter in the Gazette saying why is it only an option? Well, we can't afford to build an ice rink and have two. You know, it's a case of actually the best thing is that one gets repaired, and we hope that happens. And but that's not entirely within our hands. So
Alex, Andy, do you want to come back on anything in particular at that point?
I mean, you mentioned it. I was going to sort of jump in. You did say, obviously the best option is that Planet Ice repair what they should be repairing. You know, they should be keeping on top of it. It is that interim. You know, what's going to be there, and I'm happy to get that, through CEP to discuss. As long as we've had those conversations with the ice users and the relevant coaches, so that you understand what is the bare minimum. I may be speaking out of turn for them, but I don't think the ideal would be great. We could have the bison playing and everything, but for me, the kids and the longevity of the coaches and making sure that we've got some talent coming through is what we need to be ensuring that we're continuing. So having an Olympic-sized pad for them isn't necessarily needed. Somewhere where they can hold their games, where they can practice figure skating, where they can possibly hold small competitions, and the smaller kids matches is what they're looking for. So I'll probably get evils if I turn around now, they say.
Well, I've really got one question, and that is, in terms of what's stopping the council? What has the council got out of this current situation, and what's stopping the council being more proactive? We're the landowner; it's our residents. They're paying lots of money to private leases. We're the landlord. We just seem to be, from a public perspective, sitting back and doing very little and making assurances that we are doing what we are supposed to be doing with regards to our contract, but we can't go into any details because it's confidential. I mean, that's not going to scan very well from a public perspective. We built the rink, we then leased it. Maybe I could have a written answer in terms of how much money the council's made out of it and how much money we might have had to put into it if it was a public facility, because it looks like between them, Standard Securities and Planet Ice have let the public down big time. We've got an ice rink that's like, it's not going to be around much longer. It's been inadequately maintained. These are commercial operators, and they just seem to be sticking two fingers up at the people of Basingstoke.
You feel really passionate about it, and I get that. Go on, Alex, and I'll comment.
Sorry, Paul. Just to add as well, Gavin, you mentioned around the health and safety that Planet Ice are conducting their health and safety checks, and we get reports back. Are we? Because if I was to take you down there right now, you would very clearly see that it is not up to scratch. Somewhere along the lines, something doesn't add up, because there's mould in the changing rooms. There's mould on the hoarding on one of the sides where the stands are. As I said, trip hazards, pucks being shot through the plexiglass. That doesn't, to me, stand out as very in line with health and safety. And how can we enforce that is actually the case?
thank you for reminding me of the ice rink's public toilets. I've just got over that experience. They are awful. Well, certainly from the men's point of view. I mean, we can only do what the experts tell us. They go and do it. They audit the premises, they survey the premises, they come back with a report, and that's, you know, I'm not an expert. I mean, clearly when I walk into it, it does look like a very rundown premises, urgently needs work. But the experts say it's safe, the roof's not going to land on anybody, therefore, as long as you do these bits. So that's very much a sort of, we have to leave it to the experts to a certain degree on those things, whatever my views are on it. And certainly I know a number of members of Cabinet have been over there during the winter, and many thought, why is this open? But, you know, that's, we know it's coming to the end of its natural life as it stands. But that's where we are. In terms of the interim, yeah, I say we don't know. The ice rink could close tomorrow and it would take 5 years to build a new one. Then you've got a temporary ice rink for 5 years. That's a very different context to, at some point it might close in the next year to 18 months for a period of a year. So again, that's the options that are going to come to you. We still don't have a definitive answer. We're doing a lot of work to try and get a definitive answer of where we go next and get some deadlines and dates, but that's tricky. But that work is happening, and I appreciate Councillor McCormack's point of view. It is frustrating that it's commercially sensitive and we can't say, but obviously there is a game, not a game, but there is a thing being played at the moment. You know, there will be lawyers from other parties potentially watching this webcast. I'm happy to meet up and brief you two at some point with the officers and give you a bit more information, but in public domain, at the moment we are just following the appropriate process.
Honestly.
Yes, well, I mean, you know my views on the ice rink. I think one of the areas which I've said since we first came into administration that I'm surprised about is the fact that Planet Ice has got insurance. And I think if anybody wants to go out and do some due diligence on the insurance policy on that building, okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Just coming back on what you're both saying, I think it's sitting there on having the same conversations that we were having over a year ago and being here and having the responsibility that comes with it, I think is really a reflection of this ice rink needs to be resolved one way or the other. And we have two parties who we want to see resolve it. You say that we are the landowner. We are the freehold owner, and there are leases and there are legal agreements in place that we must respect in how we go about dealing with it, and we will do that because we have to. And you would not expect us not to, because we would not put the council in a position that was inappropriate. So we will take the appropriate action in the way that we need to deal with what's in front of us. But I can assure you, when you talk about what's proactively being done, the officers very clearly here, not just we here, but the officers here, and they are working very hard on this, from both the property services team, from our sports team, from all the teams that are involved in this. They are all working very hard because they recognise, like we do, how important this is. I don't want anybody to walk out the room thinking the council's not doing everything it can, because we are. But within that, that presents choices. If the current ice rink is repaired, if the schedule is presented, if an agreement is reached, that presents one avenue to go down. If that is not, we've made it very clear that in the consideration of the future of the new leisure complex, that ice needs to be considered as a part of that, and there's a process involved in that too. And that's why that decision was made in the way that it was, to allow that avenue to go down, for us to go down that avenue, but that we need to exhaust the first as well. So there's forks in the road here. Which way do we go, depending upon the decisions of others that are beyond and outside of this room? And you know that, everybody knows that. And we need them to make those decisions, don't we? But rest assured, we are putting their feet to the fire in every way we can. I think in terms of the scrutiny process, some of those questions, Andy, that you were asking fit quite appropriately in that scrutiny process. We have a scrutiny function in the council, so let's allow that scrutiny function to be fulfilled. Let's allow members and residents to have their say through that process, and then an awful lot of that concern that relates to the past and the history can be discussed, and that's fine. It will give us recommendations, I'm sure, and we can listen to those recommendations and understand them and what it might mean for the future of any other facility. That's fine. While all of that's going on over there, there's the other elements of your motion which I think are important. So meeting with the users, I think that's really important. We've never closed the door. We are always willing to meet, so that's never going to be an issue. What we can then resolve is a different matter, and that's going to involve a conversation and involve some work. I think in terms of what you were talking about the report coming to CEP. I think that report will be obviously an officer report that will be a public report. It may well have pink elements to it, the confidential elements to it. We'll have to find that out when we get that far. But that's because this is also commercially sensitive, and we shouldn't forget that either. But there are elements that should be absolutely brought to CEP for that debate in the motion, as you've said. So we can do that. But let's not be anybody under any illusions of the sort of cost implications that we're talking about for the length of time that we don't know at the moment, and the choices that may then be presented to the council that we've got to choose an awful lot in those circumstances. And that's a debate that needs to be had. I think in terms of your point about the legals, I think we're clear. Everybody is doing everything they can in the context of those legal negotiations and conversations. So in terms of the motion, I think everything that's in it can be taken forward in one way or another. I don't think we're saying we can't. And I think that's probably the different ways of doing it that work best to your motion. And I hope you would agree with that. And let's see how far we can push this, see how more we can now push this, because I think we all want to see a resolution one way or the other. And we've said we want to see ice in Basingstoke. That's an ambition that we want, an aspiration that we want. We're clear on that. How we get there is going to be a really important journey beyond this point. And I just think that the people came last time round. You all shared your views. You gave us your heart and soul into your presentation to us, and we respect that. And social media is social media. I get all of that. In some ways, let all of that go on over there, because the only thing that matters at the end of the day is the outcome. You know, the debate will be the debate, but the only thing that matters is the actual outcome in all of this, and that's where our focus is. And I hope that helps, because we want to make it help. We want to be as helpful and as direct as we can be. And the safety of the residents as well, that is part of that as well. Nothing is happening that isn't very well thought through and considered and within the scope of the law as it stands. Is there anything else you guys want to come back with before we take it any further? Are you okay?
Thank you very much for obviously hearing us out. And just to reconfirm though that no one in this council is holding up the current issues with Planet Ice not being able to complete the works.
No. Officers are doing everything they can to facilitate where they're able to. So in terms of where we are on this, colleagues, we've got the motion in front of us. In terms of taking it forward, the suggestion is that the first part of the motion relating to the independent investigation, that we can only invite scrutiny. We can't direct them. We can ask scrutiny to consider point one of that. And can I encourage you both to lobby scrutiny for that effort, because that's where it needs to be. It's their choice. We can't direct them, but I think scrutiny would take it up, and I think the chair has indicated at full council that he would do that. But let's see and deal with that. So the first point is that scrutiny picks up that investigation, and that is undertaken through that. That also then relates to your other 2 points there, Alex, your other 2 bullet points. So on bullet point 4, you ask us to arrange a meeting with the Users Forum, the ice hockey and figure skating coaches and leadership. We're happy to do that, and we will seek to do that. In terms of a report to CEP in June, we will get the report produced. We will do our best to meet the June deadline that you've asked of us, but the point is the report will be created, the officers will do the work, and it will be brought forward. Let's see if we can get it into the June cycle. Don't forget, that's going to be straight after the election, so it might wind up being July if it has to because of all of that. But the point is the work is not going to go on, it will go on. In terms of the points you make about legal advice and the rest of it, our answer to that is that it is all already going on. The work is already happening all around that, and that we would want to see continue, I think, colleagues. And then the rest of the final bit you talk about, go back to council. Well, this is going to rumble on no matter what happens, so full council will have a view and continue to express its view. You will all continue to express and let us know. We will continue to do the work we're doing on it. So this will continue until we have what we want, which is the outcome, the resolution. So that's, I think, a reasoned praise. Are we all comfortable with that direction of travel, colleagues? Yeah. Thank you. You both okay? Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming this evening on this particular motion. I know how much you care about it, and we do too. The next item on the agenda is the first substantive item, and that's the biodiversity strategy. Paul, do you want to come forward to the speaker bit? Chris, would you like to introduce the strategy? And then we'll invite Paul to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will. So in 2021, this council declared its ecological emergency, which of course is important to the future well-being of our borough. We must ensure that biodiversity is protected and enhanced and that its decline is reversed. A key element is the production of this biodiversity strategy that sets out our vision, priorities and actions. Biodiversity is essential for our existence and we are losing it at an alarming rate. This year's State of the Nature report reported that the UK is a country that is massively depleted in nature and is rapidly declining even faster than scientists predicted. So we aim to provide the necessary leadership in helping arrest this decline of biodiversity and start the long, hard climb towards recovery within our borough. The strategy sets out a number of objectives and priorities that will help us move forward with purpose, I'll let that go, and make difference responding, of course, to the requirements of the Environment Act 2021. The strategy sets out principles that provide commitments in our approach to biodiversity work moving forwards. It sets out a number of actions that will be developed as standalone projects to achieve our aims. This will mean the strategy will be a living document that will evolve based on emerging practices and regular monitoring. We have three key methods. It's what we must do, that's the legislation behind it. Where we have direct control, we'll act where we have a dedicated resource and an influence, such as on our policies and the land we own and manage and maintain, and where we can lead and enable and inspire. For example, where we can work with partners, encourage residents, businesses and organisations to help us take action to support and enhance the natural environment and biodiversity. In building this strategy, the working group has collaborated with external stakeholders who are keen to work with this council to make a difference and have knowledge, expertise and influence. Their contribution has helped ensure that this is a robust document that effectively sets the way forward. The working group issued a questionnaire to conservation groups and special interest groups and species interest groups. A workshop was hosted by the working group. We had a lot of key partners from the Isle of Wight Trust, National Trust, North Wessex Downs National Landscape, Test and Itchen and Loddon Catchment Partnerships, Natural England, Environment Agency, Forestry England, Many Down, Natural Basingstoke and Greener Basingstoke. And it was a well attended and I think a very welcome event. The biodiversity team has also engaged with a wide variety of internal service areas within this council to explore opportunities for biodiversity enhancements within their work areas. The priorities compiled through this engagement process were presented to Community Environment and Partnership CEP Committee on 15th of November 2023, and the biodiversity team returned on the 17th of January to CEP with an updated set of principles, objectives, priorities and actions. There were further recommendations and comments, and where appropriate, these have been included in this report in the strategy or in our actual action plan. So it is crucial that we, as the whole council team of officers and members, ensure that biodiversity is a top priority in all our workplaces and indeed in planning and our local plan. The strategy will outline plans for achieving this and approach to integrate biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality and local nature recovery strategies into council work and maximise the impact their opportunities present. So once again, I will thank the officer team for their very hard work so far. There's more to come. So my recommendation to Cabinet is to improve this draft strategy 2024 to 2030, to approve the proposed action plan that we have in our appendix number 3, and to delegate to the Head of Environment and Community Services, in consultation with the portfolio holder for climate and ecological emergencies, to finalise the strategy and update the strategy and the action plan as appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Paul, over to you.
Thank you. The biodiversity strategy is welcome, and so is the inclusion of Saunders Field, if it means action. The devil will be in the report detail, but we have a good start here and an action plan. It would be useful to have goals that identify for everyone the breadth and depth of what is to be delivered, especially on BDBC land, and from which measurable objectives would be derived. For example, improvements in target species diversity, abundance and distribution on statutory and non-statutory sites would be one. It is worth noting that HBIC capacity is already limited, and given likely county-wide demands, there could be a bigger shortfall without extra funding and resources, or perhaps some innovative thinking. The biodiversity and green infrastructure strategies are interdependent. In at least one group, there is a desire to progress urban green infrastructure, so contact for that would be helpful. It is noted that the scope of the strategy emphasises estate management on council land, but there seem to be a lot of actions involving the biodiversity team in priorities focused elsewhere, with estate management matters mostly left to operational services, including the ranger team. If so, this is concerning. It is worth noting at this point that verges and open spaces may offer more habitat potential than they are given credit for in the action plan. Additionally, they are tentacles, an important way of building awareness and engagement in our communities. Charismatic habitats, if you like charismatic species. Please do not lose sight of the near-term aspirations, priorities and needs of community groups, including their evolving desire for a distinctive role, participation in decision-making and expectations of services, service delivery and quality, and how they are delivered. Community groups have grown from the bottom up, work at the sharp end, have delivered results, experience restrictions and problems that go unresolved, and struggle to build capacity. They want to do more and better and secure greater participation than their own and other communities, so they have greater agency in decisions and can secure grants, rewards, incentives and other forms of funding to resource their activities. Finally, other aspirations shared by groups include hearing fewer residents say, "Shouldn't the council do that?" and fewer responses to a question that can be translated to mean, "You can't do that," or "We can't do that, so you can't." We need societal change to achieve more engaged, connected communities, but we need residents and government to adapt together. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Hang on a minute. Paul, you might want to hear any responses that come. Chris, would you like to respond to anything that Paul...
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for your contribution. I'm pleased that you're happy we are going somewhere, and I do take on board your points. Probably not in a random order here, but your the commitment to community groups, that goes without saying, right? That it may not be as ideal as it could be, but it will get better. I can assure you that we need community groups to actually make this happen. So it's in our interest to actually get that possibly running smoother. In terms of measures and monitoring, in our Appendix 3, we have got a monitoring plan. It is very important that we do monitor our progress, otherwise it's all kind of pointless. Right now, we're waiting for the final. We commissioned an audit from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Trust of species in the borough as a baseline to gather all the data together, and that's an important state of where we are. So all this is about actions, but it's all about monitoring as well. So I can assure you that that's key. I certainly wouldn't want to just second guess everything. So hopefully that reassures you. Thank you.
Paul, do you want to come back?
Just one point. I mentioned the goals part. I think it's important for residents and for councillors and for anybody else to understand the major goals that you're trying to achieve in terms of delivery. And I feel that there's something spread around in that document, but it doesn't come together with 3 or 4 key goals, which is why I gave you one example. There's a couple more in my notes that I've passed on, which may or may not be acceptable, but it's an attempt to get something that everybody can coalesce around.
Thanks, Paul. I've got Andy and Ollie that want to come in as well. Andy.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm really pleased to see the strategy brought forward this evening. I had the privilege of proposing the motion that led to the declaration of the ecological emergency, with a lot of hard work from Paul and his team behind the scenes in making that happen. So to see this as one of the emerging action points is really encouraging. One of the ambitions of that ecological emergency declaration was to start thinking strategically about biodiversity in this borough, and this is one of the ways in which we're doing that. So it's really pleasing to see. I just pick up on the point, Paul, that you made about community groups, because it's something. There are some groups in my area that I've worked closely with and speak to on a regular basis. I think the situation has definitely improved over the last year, 8 to 18 months. Hopefully you're seeing that too. As Chris said, I think there's an opportunity to do more, and we'll certainly continue to do that. But I have seen that the tide has turned, and there does seem to be a better working relationship between the council and certainly some of the community groups that do an awful lot of the hard work to support the ecology in our borough.
That's a good point. Go on, Paul, quickly.
Just a final response. Yes, we welcome certain improvements last year, but certainly there are more that we want to see.
Cool. Ollie.
Paul, I just wanted to say thank you very much for all of the hard work that you do in this area. You are amazing, and all of the groups that work together with you are extraordinary. And the contribution that you've made to our borough already and the lobbying is really very important. So thank you very much. I also want to say a big thank you to the team and to Councillor Tomlin and to Councillor Konecki, because I'm really proud of this paper. I'm very excited with where it's heading. I think we're all going to have to hold Hampshire County Council's feet to the fire, as usual, because we need them to identify some significant local network recovery areas, and that's beyond our remit, but we know where they should be, and we need them to play ball. And I'm super excited about the prospect of requiring every new house that is built and extension that's 2-storey with a Swift brick. I'm really hoping that that's going to be fulfilled, but thanks a million, Paul.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. Chris, was there anything else you want to add, and are we okay to move?
No, Chair, thank you. I also thank Paul, of course, and for the comments from other Cabinet members.
Go on, Kerry.
I'd just like to say that my love for sport is only really equalled by my love for nature. Volunteering at Wigmore Heath and other places in my ward where I volunteer, it takes the stress away from politics. And I'd like to thank all the officers that have put this together, and the other staff that have brought this strategy to life and will continue to develop this strategy. I think we've recruited really well. The officers I've come across have been excellent, really knowledgeable, and it makes me really proud to be part of this council. And finally, just a big thank you to all the community groups, the volunteers and the rangers that allow us to go out there and spend time in nature. So thank you.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because both the climate change motion and the ecological emergency motion were unanimously supported by full council. So this is very much, both of them actually, from a climate point of view, and everything we're doing towards 2025 and 2030, and everything that relates to the ecological bit have been supported by the whole authority, and the entire, all 54 councillors have been working hard on those things to bring them to fruition. And that's an important point to recognise, is a whole council initiative on both of those. And in the context of this, Paul, all the community groups, I mean, from Natural Basingstoke to the Greener Bay, all the groups and all the community groups are an integral part of this as well. So I think in terms of the actual strategy, it will fit perfectly in the suite of what the ambition and aspiration of this cabinet is, our administration is, but more than that, the council itself. So, Chris, you laid out the recommendations quite clearly. I won't repeat them, but Cabinet colleague, are you happy to pass the recommendations as Chris set them out to us, and we approve the biodiversity strategy as written? Agreed. Thank you, colleagues. Next item on the agenda, I'll go through the agenda if that's okay, Andy, if you don't mind. I know you've got 2 more to go. Is the ultra-low emissions Hackney Carriage Assisted Purchase Scheme, and I've got both Laura and Chris down on this one to speak. So who's going to go first to introduce the paper?
Thank you, Leader. This paper came about because we've got an ageing stock of taxis, and we really need to do something about it. We've also got a reducing number of hackney carriages as well, and that is of concern if you look at the graph within the report. And as well as that, the ageing population of the drivers is of concern, set against very expensive taxis that are out of price for most people. So why that is of concern from my perspective, and obviously Chris will talk about from a climate agenda and why we're doing this, is that these taxis are accessible and they're wheelchair accessible, and that is essential that we have that service. Therefore, it's really important that we continue to ensure that these are part of what is out there and is delivered. They're also that we have some element of control over the costings of what residents of the borough have to pay. The paper sets out some pricing as to what is going to, what's possible in relation to the Electric London Vehicle Company and the agreements. And we're looking at giving a £5,000 grant. There's additional grants as well available from government. There is real interest out there. We've tested this with the drivers, and there's real interest in wanting to take this forward. And the people are waiting for the opportunity following tonight's decision to start to work on this. So I just present the case and ask Chris to talk to the climate change agenda, and also to thank him for the support that he's given to this initiative.
Thank you, Laura. Chris?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So yes, there's a sum of money, the grant. We're funding this from the climate emergency funding. £100,000 is the maximum figure that we're putting to this, and effectively the prediction is that we'll probably be getting 17 grants out of this, or there'll be 17 taxis or hackney cabs. There's a difference. Hackney cab, you can just hail in the street, whereas the other taxis, if we know them there, you have to book. So these are ones you can just pick up at the station and hail. So 17, we think. So when you actually look at that, in terms of carbon, the figures suggested that it can save 10 tonnes in the typical year use of a cab. And so obviously the maths is 170 tonnes. That's worth having. We don't claim that. It's just making the borough a better place. And just to put it into perspective, I mean, that's over 200 homes with solar installation. So it's quite a significant chunk. And yes, it does have the ability to put wheelchairs in. And we are looking at schemes that possibly the hackney carriages can be booked or arranged for people who need accessibility. Because if you're at the station, you can jump in one and wheel yourself into one or whatever, but it's a bit different from at home. And of course, we're going to put, never missing an opportunity, we're going to wrap them with borough news stories and sustainable Basingstoke slogans and all sorts of things from time to time to just make folk aware. So it's a bit of an advert. So I recommend this. I think it's a great idea, and we all power to hopefully people take up the grants. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, just I thank you to Cabinet colleagues and officers for bringing this paper forward, and just highlight from my perspective, my portfolio, the how pleased I am to see that the way that accessibility is recognised, because it's so important to social inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Laura, did you want to just come back quickly?
I just want to say, following what Chris said, is I think the imagery is going to be really important in front of the station. I think it says something about us as an administration and our commitment to the borough. And I just think that they're going to be sitting outside the station there and moving around and driving around the town. And I think that imagery is a clear statement that we have as a borough.
I think it's a real statement of the council's serious support for Hackney carriages, for the whole point of those are being important businesses, because they are small businesses, and their importance to us, and the fact that in the recommendations, as you've quite rightly pointed out, is a £5,000 grant that we're offering. It's over £100,000 out of the Climate Change Reserve to fund this. So there will be multiple opportunities for drivers to apply for the grant to improve their vehicles and go green in the process. Don't forget the charging point that's gone in at the station as well, that will help, which is an important point. And that the actual ask of us is to delegate the authority in the recommendation to the head of law and governance to enter into an agreement with the Hackney carriage drivers, licensed by our borough and with LEVC, to deliver this as a project. So those are the 3 points of the recommendation that are in front of us. This is a great initiative, and it says an awful lot about our ambition and our aspiration. So colleagues, are you happy to accept the decision that's in front of us and the recommendations? Brilliant, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda. Andy, do you want to come back to the speaker spot? Next item on the agenda is the proposed key performance indicators. That is page 81 of our agenda this evening. And this is my paper to introduce to you. There's been an awful lot of conversation and engagement on the indicators. The officer team have done a lot of work around not only the presentation of the information and how the information is communicated, but the information itself. And this is an evolving process. This is not the finished product. It is never the finished product. These are the performance indicators as they are currently, and we will continue to work on them, and the officer team will continue to generate what they look like, the input, the data, and how we can improve going into the future. This is never the finished product. What they are is a waypoint to allow us as the authority to hold ourselves to account, to have scrutiny and the performance board hold us to account, and to reflect the organisation's success in delivering against the priorities of the organisation and the services that we offer our residents. And so really the performance panel and scrutiny have helped shape these. We've helped shape them as Cabinet. It's for us to approve them this evening. On the recommendation, there are 2 points. The first point is to approve the proposed 24-25 key performance indicators, whilst noting the comments of scrutiny at section 6 in the report, and that's important. And then secondly, to approve the proposed RAG scoring approach, the change to the approach, again, that was debated and has been consulted on. And again, hopefully this is a step in the right direction. So I introduced the paper, but now ask Andy if you want to say a few things, Andy, that would be most good. So over to you, mate, you've got the microphone.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I'll just start by saying that key performance indicators are really important, and Joe Public listening out there might not quite realise the importance of KPIs, but we had a good example today where we had members of the government spouting off about how councils could save money by spending less on diversity. And if I take one example, Birmingham, which has just issued its notice, and many will follow because we've had more councils declare effective bankruptcy than in the last 3 years. We have in the previous 30. Birmingham was quite a big spender on diversity, but diversity accounted for 0.2% of its £2 billion budget. So there's a lot of fluff out there from government about what council should be doing. KPIs are an objective measurement of a council's performance. Having said that, there were a few things I think that we should be measuring that we're not measuring, and a few things that we should be doing better. A bit disappointed to see that with the energy metrics, we're not going to be metricating our buildings. It's well known that our buildings are really poor for energy efficiency, and not just the buildings that we use as a council, but some of the community buildings that we own. And I think it's really important that we keep KPIs on the buildings that we own, the buildings we use, and use that to drive forward the massive amount of work we need to do to become a carbon neutral borough by 2030, and not try and dodge that key goal, because the council can set an example to other commercial community organisations and indeed our residents about the need for carbon neutrality and the need for increased energy efficiency in the buildings. I was also a bit disappointed with the water butt scheme. I think we need metrics on grey water. It's one of the key things that's cropping up now in terms of what housing can we provide to house our future residents, meet our future needs. Water demand, stressing on water, an obvious solution to that, to use less water per head, is to increase the use of grey water, and we need to be seen as a council to be metricating on that and introducing schemes to help our residents save water. Just a couple of other things, and I made a note on my phone, but it just seems to want to blank the screen on me at the moment, so just bear with me a second.
Don't worry, take your time.
While I get my 8 memoir up together again. Charge points in all wards, that's a really welcome KPI. I think it's pretty obvious that the increased take-up in electric vehicle usage is outstripping our provision in Basingstoke, and it's not just us. I mean, we have our own car parks. We've also got commercial people that can also be putting in more charge points. The response to the previous council leader was extremely disappointing when he said, "We're not a petrol station." It's incumbent on us as a borough to show the way on this. And you know, at the moment, we have district centres like Brighton Hill and Chinham which don't have charge points in. We have very limited access to chargers in the south and west of the town, where 40,000 people have got maybe 2 public charge points, you know, serving that area, and they're both off the A30 near Southam and Brighton Hill. So if you live in Beggarwood, you know, you've got miles to go before you find a charger. So I think that one's really important. I'm a bit at a loss why we're removing some of the recycling KPIs, like dry recycling KPIs. Contamination rates, and contamination rates are being held up as a reason why our recycling's low, because if you put contaminated cardboard with pizza in or whatever, it can potentially contaminate an entire consignment. So we can't really get away with saying, whoa, contamination, when that may have a disincentive, when it can be shown at present that contamination only affects about 2% of our recycling, and the main message should be increase our recycling. And not to worry about so much things like contamination, or even some of the issues that we've had with our recycling points. The previous administration decided it was going to do away with loads of bring banks. The county council want to cut down on their household waste recycling centres. You know, this is a folly, that we should be increasing our recycling, and we should be finding ways to monetise that. These are valuable raw materials. We should be reusing and recycling and not making things new if we can possibly avoid it. So that's pretty much all I had to say. So I hope that moving forward we can get some more meaningful KPIs in the budget. And I would like to see, and I think this is a separate piece of work, we start metricating some of the things that the council is not a direct measure of the council, but the things that the council can influence. So things like the top of town, festival place, retail occupancy, diversity of attractions and retail provision. It's very easy for a council to say, oh, it's nothing to do with us, it's private, it's commercial. But it's an indicator of the health of the town and the health of our communities. And I think we need to embark on that work. Okay. And also what provision we've got, like youth clubs or whatever, in our communities, because you know, it will be quite shocking to find that there are large parts of Basingstoke, like Brighton Hill, for instance, doesn't have a youth project anymore. And it's one of the biggest estates in the borough. So, you know, I would be keen for us to build on this work and cast our net wider.
I think there's always scope to build on the work. I think that's fair. And I just, you know, the officers, and I want to thank them, because the amount of effort that's gone in here to update, change and adapt what we've been working with needs to be recognised, and I want to thank them for that. I think the points you make, Andy, are well understood, and I think there's a balancing act, and it's interesting between that which are national indicators that we have to follow that inform this work, that which involves organisations and groups that we have absolutely nothing over in terms of accountability. They are their own groups, they are their own organisations, and we can't easily create a metric in that way. We've got to think about what you're talking about in order to achieve something of meaning, and that isn't easy. These are about us, they're about what this council does, and a lot of what you said I think is things that we should take away and think about, and I respect that, and that's part of the next process. You know, your point about charge points is just one example, but it's picked up in here and it involves us, and it involves the county, and it involves the suppliers, and it involves everybody. But this particular metric relates specifically to us and our element of what we can do. So I think that's a very fair comment that you make. So in terms of the actual process here, as you will know, the paper is very transparent. It shows the conversation that we've had. It talks about the officer response to that. It talks about our response. So the paper sets out quite clearly the process we've gone through to get to this stage. And I think that's quite an important point. The openness and transparency that we have as an organisation to get to this point of adopting these particular performance indicators. So colleagues, would anybody else like to contribute? Andy?
Thank you very much, Paul. I was going to make a comment about a couple of the KPIs in there. One of them was around the EV charging, so I won't repeat what Andy said other than to thank him for making that point. The second was around the tree targets, which will make everyone around Cabinet smile, because I've forced everyone in Cabinet to have lots of discussions about this, perhaps perhaps a bit too much, but we've got there, and you will see that there is a net tree target there. So in the past we had a gross target of planting 400 trees per annum. However, when we did some research around it, we discovered that we were actually chopping down more than 400 trees per annum. So we were setting ourselves a target which would lead to an annual reduction in the number of trees in our borough, which just felt wrong, and particularly in the light of the biodiversity strategy that we've approved, it doesn't sit very comfortably with that. So we push very hard to end up with a net target. So we have to end each year with more trees in our borough. So more trees planted than cut down. It sounds like a very easy thing to do, but it's not. And as often as officers and my fellow Cabinet members will appreciate, having gone through this process, it's much trickier than it appears to be. But we've got there. That target is there, and I think at the risk of overstating it, I think it really is an important addition and change to the KPIs, and I strongly welcome it. I think it's sort of reflective overall of the direction that we've taken these KPIs as an administration over the last 12 months.
Thank you. Anybody else? The recommendation was Laura.
Just pick up on one in relation to fly tipping. It's a new indicator, and I think that's really important that that's in there. I know that lots of people, residents in the borough, feel really strongly about that. So I welcome that as a new indicator within this strategy. In relation to some of the comments that Councillor McCormick said in relation to community buildings, obviously as one of our priorities, it's to put solar panels on community buildings, and that will help to ensure, and that journey to ensure that those community buildings are sustainable. That piece of work is underway and has started, and I welcome that, and obviously that will form a big piece of work for those community centres going forward. But I think there's an enormous amount of work that's gone into these KPIs from members and particularly from the officers, and just to say a big thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Anybody else? Okay, we've got the recommendation in front of us, colleagues. Are you happy to approve both of those two recommendations and we take the paper?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, the Q3 Capital Budget Monitoring Report. Gavin, would you like to introduce, and then I'll ask Andy to make a comment?
Yeah, this shouldn't take long because, of course, it predates the capital budget that we agreed in February full council. So this sort of update informed that document. So all the things that have moved across into that new budget. It is possibly one of the most frightening numbers. The original budget was 30 million. We're on track to spend 20 million. There's an underspend of 11 million. That is largely down to, the largest chunk of that is around the Many Down. As you know, we've progressed Many Down well. But as the deal was negotiated, it's meant that there's just shy of £5 million being shifted into next year. So it's rephased that significant piece of spending. Also worth mentioning, there is significant money in there that relates to LIF and SIF, where we're not delivering the spending. So the money's been allocated to external agencies who then have to go and procure the work themselves. As we know, procurement is very difficult at the moment, so some of those organisations have struggled. There is some good news underspend, and that's in relation to the money we put aside to keep the aquadrome going until we can replace it. The air filter pump thing, I can't find it, it's section 4, is still working, which is a great relief to us. So we're actually pleased with that particular piece of underspend. And the Living Lab is still an underspend in terms of we can draw down more money for that. Apparently it hasn't got a home, but I understand that if the Living Lab, 5G Living Lab doesn't find a home soon, it can go directly to the Willis Museum where it'd be very comfortable. So there we are. That's where we are. So significant underspend. What I will say, it's not money saved, it's money rephased. So there is a very small amount of savings in there. The rest of the money will still be needed. The anvil roof will still need fixing. It's just not going to happen this year.
Thank you, Gavin. Andy, you got the floor.
Well, thank you, Leader. And it's really opportune, I think, that we get to view papers like this and we get to hear answers on the ice rink, because you have an £11 million underspend capital this year, and there was a figure mentioned earlier of £3 million a year from the ice rink. So I'm hopeful that we actually have money as a result of underspend that could be used to build a temporary ice rink. So I would be quite happy to invite comments on that. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, money is a terrible thing. You can only spend it once. So, as I said, this is not an £11 million saving. This is an £11 million rephasing. So we can't use the money that we're going to use to support Manydown infrastructure next year. That's the £5 million that's been rephased to the following year. If we spend that on a temporary ice rink, then we can't provide infrastructure first in Manydown. Something we're committed to doing. So it's not an underspend, it's not spare money, it's just rephased money. The only impact it has, and we'll get to it when we get to the revenue paper next, is obviously it does mean that if you've got the money in the bank, it's earning interest. So that's impacted on our revenue monitoring. But yeah, I think if you look in section 4, I think that the only thing that's a real saving is around car park improvements, and that's because we're not spending money on ticket machines in rural car parks because we're not charging in rural car parks. But that's 133,000 or something. So there's no significant savings in there. It's just we haven't been able to spend the money now because we've not been able to procure the work. Things like electric vehicles, the lead-in time is longer than expected. Some of the work we have been doing, and why you can see it's underspent, we've shifted a lot of money around, is because we recognise that perhaps when this budget was drafted by the previous administration, and as a rule, there's generally been over-ambition from departments believing they can spend the money and get it out the door much quicker than they actually can. But say there isn't unspent money, it's just unspent yet. It's still allocated. Oh, and I have...
Please, Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it was just important to emphasise that this is capital. The renting and provision of a temporary ice rink would be revenue. So we couldn't use capital for that because there would be no asset at the end of it. You can only use revenue for something. And obviously the revenue of £2 million a year is a huge amount for this council, and would be the equivalent of significant services.
Andy, do you want to come back, or are we happy to?
Well, I'm sure where there's a will, there's a way. If we have, underspend, okay, that's rephase spend, but then previous capital budgets, we've had previous underspends. I think where there's a will, there's a way. And also, when you have underspends and you commit to reserves, they could be revenue reserves. I think what's really important is to bear in mind the needs of our residents in all this. I'm conscious of the fact that it's taken 25 years and we still haven't built the first house in Manydown. So, rephasing of Manydown money, it just seems like a continuation of a 25-year theme. But I think it's really important also as a council that we get into the habit of accelerating what we do and start bringing things forward. Because in general terms, the longer you leave things, the more they cost, and for reasons that I'm not entirely aware of, it always seems to be the case that when you're looking at expenditure on construction and schemes and public services, they always seem to outstrip inflation, and I'm not quite sure why that is. But basically, a stitch in time saves 9, and if we can identify some money for a temporary rink at the soonest opportunity, I would strongly recommend that to you.
Thanks, Andy. I think we just need to be absolutely clear again, just so everybody knows the page we're on. You can't turn capital back into revenue. Capital is capital. So you can turn revenue into capital, but we cannot turn capital into revenue. Those are the laws, those are the rules in which we operate. So the underspend here is not an underspend. Let's be absolutely clear. It's not an underspend. It is a rephasing of the projects to which the money has already been allocated. So you are right about Many Down. And actually, in terms of speeding things up and getting on with the job, that's been the mantra that we've had for the past 11 months of being in charge of the council. So we have now delivered on Great Wolf and the heads of terms. We have delivered on Many Down and the heads of terms, and we are moving Many Down forward. We have delivered on the leisure complex and the aquadrome. The business case is being made and the project is moving forward. We're actively pursuing those people who have come forward with suggestions for the leisure park, like the BMX, dealing with the skating issue, dealing also with the ice issues that you've said tonight. We're dealing with all of that. Look at the ecological agenda. Look at what we've just done tonight with the biodiversity strategy. That's been a year's worth of work. We've taken the local plan to Reg 18 this year. Massive piece of work. So I think you're right. It's about getting on with the job, delivering on our residents' expectations. That's what we are about. Put all the silly politics to one side because that's irrelevant. The only thing our residents want is a well-run council that is financially sound, that's delivering on their priorities, and that is exactly what this administration is about. And thank you, Andy, because in terms of your comments this year, you've pushed us on that, and that's been an important point. So I think in terms of the capital, it's really clear that Many Down will be delivered, and in delivering it, the capital expenditure of this authority is important to facilitate that. And you're right, it's been over 30 years in the waiting, and I want to see, as we all want to see, that first house built on North Many Down as soon as we can, because that's what our residents need as much as anything. And the infrastructure first. That's the other point to that. Infrastructure first, because that's our mantra. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate your contribution there. Gavin, do you want to say anything else on the paper? In which case, colleagues, we have the recommendation in front of us. It's on page 140. It's set out in 7 bullet points. It goes on the forecast capital expenditure, the significant outturn variations in section 4 that we are aware of. It talks about the Q3 forecasts and the variations. It discusses the receipts, the grants and the contributions. It discusses the latest capital programme, the risks associated with those, and the capital forecasts are detailed in section 8. And then it comments at section 7, which is the important as well, that the capital programme remains fully funded from the council's own resources through the period of the plan. So that's based on the latest forecast of available resources. Do we agree to pass it on the basis of those recommendations? Okay, colleagues, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andy. The last paper this evening is the Revenue Budget Monitoring Report. Gavin.
Yes, thank you, Paul. And again, this is sort of after the event, if you like, because the factors within this monitoring report for Q3 are reflected in the budgets that we passed last month. There is a just shy of £1.2 million surplus sitting in it at this stage. Obviously, this isn't the outturn report. We have to wait to the end of the year before we see exactly what's going on. It's made up of a number of items, 2 significant items. One is the difficulty getting staff, really, the replacement of staff. Recruitment can take longer to certain roles, and this inevitably means vacancies sit longer, and it's something we've reflected in budgets for future years. The other factor is the underspending capital. That £11 million underspend is sitting in the bank earning perhaps slightly more interest than we were expecting it to, because we weren't expecting it to be there. And those are the 2 main factors that have led to the underspend, the surplus that we're sitting on at the moment, which is 1.2 million, as I say, and that's just for noting.
Okay, colleagues. Anneli.
Can I just say, Councillor James, thank you for all of your hard work on both these papers. And to the leader, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. The recommendation in front of us is on page 164. Have a quick look at that. Is there anybody else that'd like to make a contribution to the debate? We happy? Then the recommendation in front of us is to note the financial position for Q3, to note the budget firemonths amounting to 0.61 million, to note the savings, income and investment position as detailed in section 7 of the report, and to note the risks associated with the revenue forecast detailed in section 8. Are you all agreed? Thank you, colleagues. That is the end of the agenda this evening. I close the meeting and thank you very much for everybody who attended and contributed. Thank you.